everyone. So, to stave off the isolation madness, I've been watching a lot of Star Trek recently. I love a bit of sci-fi, mate. And I particularly love the approach towards the costumes, of course. Now, there are loads of really outlandish, cool designs, but they're mostly reserved for the aliens and different planets and that, so instead I will talk about the stuff that we see in every episode on dozens of characters, the uniforms, the Starfleet uniforms mostly. Now, okay, Starfleet isn't military, but I think the closest parallel in the real world and the here and now is military uniforms, because you've got a lot of the same duties being performed, you've got a lot of the same situations and scenarios coming up. And the clothes in Star Trek aren't necessarily the most practical for this. I mean, I'm not even talking particularly about the mini dress or scant. It's not the best. I mean, I don't think that pervs won't exist in however many years' time. I think people would probably still try and look up your skirt when you're bending over to fix a panel. It's not ideal, and for a larger hipped woman, it's a bit restrictive having something that's so snug, even with the flap. This flap is good for movement to a certain extent, but it does look a bit awkward if you're a bit too big in the hips, if you're a pear-shaped like me. The ones that really bother me, and which I think cause problems for cosplayers, are the two big sins of Starfleet uniforms for me: lycra jumpsuits and back zips. And of course these are combined in TNG in the back-zipped lycra jumpsuits. Now, jumpsuits have been done in other kind of sci-fi military settings, like Battlestar Galactica's lovely leather flight suits, and they're really good. They're really sensible. They look like RAF flight suits where they have a nice big zip up the front, they're baggy, they're practical, and you hop in your plane, you go off, you come back, and then you usually take it off. Fantastic. Star Trek's jumpsuits, not so much. You can see that they are just lycra, and you'd think that stretch fabric means that the fit would be easy, but it really isn't on an entire one piece like that. You've got to get the height sorted as well as the girth. If you don't have the height sorted, you have what happens a lot in Star Trek, where it can pull up slightly at the ankles, or it can pull down on the shoulders. And you get this weird phenomenon where instead of following the curve of the back, the jumpsuit just goes straight down in an angle, stretching between the two, because that's the shorter path. It doesn't look very good. It's not very flattering, and it's not very comfortable. If you've got a jumpsuit like that, it can pull up at the crotch, it can pull down at the shoulders. They're not that much fun to wear. Interestingly, you see this the most in Star Trek, where the main cast get the updated uniforms every so often, and then their old uniforms get passed on to the kind of extras and the background cast. And so you see the background cast really often wearing uniforms that don't quite fit them. I think there are some really good examples of this in Generations, the film, where they've obviously had to go back to uniforms. It's, not flattering. Also, jumpsuits just are not very practical. It's fine if you're hopping in it, going and doing something and then changing back out, but you have to take the whole thing off to pee. And while you're on shift, that's not very practical, and it's not very practical while you're at a convention either. I know some cosplayers who will basically starve themselves, not eat and really not drink for the duration of a convention to avoid having to go to the toilet. I'm a lot more easygoing. I find conventions a lot easier to get through as well if you eat and drink. So, having to take your whole costume off to pee is not good. Obviously, Star Trek, they actually realised that this wasn't a good approach, and at one point they did start making the uniforms two-piecers, with a jacket and trousers. They kept the same design, and it was actually quite a subtle changeover, and it's really nicely done in that regard. And I would suggest, if you're thinking about cosplaying the jumpsuit, go for the two-piece. It might not look quite as neat, like I say, it was a subtle difference. They had at first just a seam there where the two joined, or not even joined, just an overlap. There have been some other approaches, like DS9, some of them, I think mostly the Bajorans, but some of the Starfleet, they had the two parts, but then the join was covered by a belt, which works quite well. In Discovery as well, they had a two-piece, but with quite snug trousers, and they actually had a panel, went from about here to mid-thigh, and two separate panels, one on the top, one on the bottom, and they tried to keep them aligned to make it look like a jumpsuit. This does have the problem that as you twist and turn, they get misaligned. So if you want to go for that version, you could add some poppers or some Velcro, put your trousers on, put your jacket on, and just pin the two together there. And that would keep them a bit more in line, but it would reduce movement a bit. But yeah, I would absolutely suggest going for the two-piece look over the jumpsuit. The jumpsuits, they don't even look that good to me. I mean, if Troy is told off for wearing these casual outfits, is this uniform really that much more formal at all? And then the second sin, as far as I'm concerned, is the back zips. I do get it. I know that they wanted it to look like in this wonderful future, clothes don't necessarily need to follow the same rules of garments and don't need to have obvious fastenings. But the problem is we are very much in a world where garments do need obvious fastenings, or at least need fastenings, and if you know what you're looking at, it's pretty obvious to see that chunkier zip line down the back where the seam just looks a bit thicker and it goes on both sides and it looks pretty obvious, and then you've got that little zip pull at the top. Even with an invisible or hidden zipper, it's actually pretty obvious that it's there. It took me a while, in fact, to find out that they were trying to keep them all hidden. I just thought they were designed really badly. Because, okay, even the jumpsuits have it. So not only have you got to get out of your entire uniform to pee, you've got to find someone who is willing to help you with the last 6 inches if you can't contort yourself and get at your zipper. And that's just bad. Interestingly, this is another thing where, like the jumpsuits, they turn it to 2 pieces. They did actually start putting the zips in the front. So around the end of TNG, DS9, they have the front zippers, which are much more practical and do actually leave for some nice kind of storytelling hints. Like in the Dominion War, you see that the Doctor looks tired and he's not bothering to zip up fully and he's got his sleeves rolled up. You know, he's hot, he's bothered, he's busy. And it just gives that little clue to the character's mentality at that moment, which is quite cool. The zipper placement actually also has quite a lot to do with the fit as well. A front zipper is always going to be the easiest for you to do with fit. Having one that comes up the back of the neck can often be a lot scratchier and more irritating than having one where you're used to it up the front. And some of the outfits have really badly placed zippers to make them really difficult to fit. The original series scant is quite simple, but by the time you get to the TNG scant, they had a zip that came from the neck to about here, and then a second zip that came from here downwards. And it was necessary to follow the panelling they had, but it is a real pain, because if you don't get the measurements right on the first try, and you're trying to take some in, you can take some in from this side more easily, but then you'll end up asymmetrical. So if you're trying to make one of those, I'd really strongly suggest making a mock-up first, and make sure that you get your fit perfect. And that includes getting a second person, you know, wear your outfit, get a second person to go around and pin in where you need to take some in, or add some in, or whatever, because you'll want to make sure that it fits from all sides. So you can put that zip in last and know that that's it, done. Personally for me, I think it's a shame that some of the easier costumes to do are actually their formal uniforms. And I say that's a shame because I personally think they're pretty ugly, a lot of them. Especially... So in the original series they had the gold rickrack on the sleeves and some other sparkly gold details. And in TNG and onwards, they kept some of these sparkly gold details for some of the formal uniforms, and I think actually it looks a bit tacky. It looks a bit Amdram, kind of over the top, rather than we are an official organisation. Nonetheless, the costumes, the formal uniform costumes, are actually pretty simple to make, because a lot of the more formal ones follow a straight up and down, whereas a lot of them, particularly on females, they try to follow a waistline and give a more defined shape. But the straighter nature of the formal uniforms, plus the fact that they often clip up across the front, as seen in some where you have a nice flap that can flap down and give a bit more detail if you want, that makes them a lot simpler. Some of them as well have elasticated sides, some of both the formal uniforms and the normal uniforms, which makes the fit a lot simpler. I think the simplest of all, though, is probably the kind of captain's casual jacket worn by Picard. On some of these, and with some of the formal uniforms, the key to really nailing them is fabric choice. I mean, this is just some kind of polyester blend. This is a cheap one that was given to me, but it still looks pretty decent because I've worked on the fit and the panelling isn't bad. With some of the simpler outfits, fabric choice is really going to make or break it. Picard's casual jacket, the bottom red part looks like suede or maybe a really short pile velvet. I'd probably use a suedette. And then you've got the nice kind of shiny padded shoulders. They would be the trickiest bit to sew, but as long as you get those two fabrics and the two textures spot on, I think that's what really makes a costume like that look good. Or conversely, if you make the whole thing out of cotton, it won't quite look the part. And speaking of fabrics, some of them, like the 09 films and Discovery, have what I like to call the cosplay killer. It's not so much a problem these days, but custom printed fabrics. I loathe custom printed fabrics. I mean, I love them, they're beautiful to look at, but basically that means you have to drop 30 quid a metre on getting it custom printed, and that is the only way to do it. I've tried doing a geometric pattern for Arkham Asylum Catwoman. It took about 10 hours and it wasn't particularly neat. If you want something, because the Star Trek ones are normally teeny tiny Starfleet insignias, if you want something like that, your best bet really is probably getting it printed, and that is a pain. I mean, it's very much doable these days. I still just bear a grudge against them. However, those little details would look really nice and would make it look the part. I do think there's some hope in modifying the pre-made 09 costume. Kind of Rubies, I think, is one of the big companies. The ones made by them. They have the right fabric and they're often a lot cheaper than buying that amount of fabric. So maybe if you buy a size too big or two sizes too big, you could actually modify it in and get the fit really nice. I'm not so sure about the Discovery ones because the panels are down the side. It might be then harder to fit around that without losing loads of that pattern bit. And I think one of the problems with that for me is that I don't necessarily think the printed fabrics are the best kind of detailing that they've given it. I think back along they moved from this kind of block colour to having a base colour, black or grey, from the shoulders down, and then having coloured and detailed shoulders to denote which speciality they were in. And sometimes they went further and had a coloured turtleneck and a two-colour plain over jacket. And I think actually this works a lot better for me than the printed fabrics. Problem is, the plain colours, that's nice, but all you can really do with it is have some offset detailing like the black collar and have nice panelling. The printed fabrics give much the same problem. I think this is why in Discovery, when they had that, and then they had Pike's crew coming in the single colours, they tried to keep some details like the asymmetric collar, which I do like, it's nice, I like asymmetric details, but it's one small detail, and that's about all they could really control to make them look cohesive. Whereas when they moved to having the shoulders all changeable, it actually offers up a lot more opportunities to have kind of detailing in what's otherwise a very plain outfit. So you've got stripes of colour, you've got different areas of colour, you've got some different panelling in there. They often feature, you know, the shoulders coming down onto the sleeve at an angle, which is a pain to make. You have to pattern that and you have to make it, they do still have that sleeve up seam up there. So you make your sleeve with a triangle in the top, and then you have to get them matched up perfectly. but it gives a lot more opportunity, oddly, and you wouldn't necessarily think that from having most of the costume be grey. And it's for this reason that I quite like some of the uniforms in Picard as well, where they've gone for having quite a nice stripe, and then they've gone for mirroring the point down here as a point on the end of the sleeve, which actually I really like because it doesn't get in the way at all. It's not impractical to wear, but it is a nice quirky detail. I think it's quite nice having some slight details like that in the uniforms, because to go on about Picard's general costuming, we're obviously in an era where futuristic outfits are seen as a bit grey and a bit shapeless in times and places, and, you know, a bit cast cyberpunky, and it can look a little boring. One thing that unfortunately I hate about Picard is they've put the zips up the back again. I don't know why they've done it. It wouldn't even have looked out of place, it wouldn't have cut across seams up the front, but they've shoved it up the back, and they haven't even got it quite perfect in a lot of them, especially in, you know, some of the main scenes, not seams, in some of the main scenes you can see where the seams do not align, and that is a shame. Otherwise, the Picard outfits would be a bit of a challenge for an amateur to make, but not impossible. But again, personally I wouldn't recommend cosplaying it because of the annoying back zip. But hey, there you go. I could rant about back zips all day, but I will spare you that horror. Thanks for watching though. If you like what I'm doing, please do like and subscribe. And if you'd consider supporting me, please do check out my Patreon page. The link will be in the description. And I'll see you next time for another rant.